And so the second thing that we've tried to put together is to have people like Chief Roper and sometimes members of his department say, in effect, tell us your story, tell us what your experiences have been, tell us what you think of the police, and we are going to sit here and listen, whatever that is. So we begin by acknowledgment, atonement, apology. We move on to hearing. And in Birmingham and a lot of the other National Initiative cities, those convenings began months ago and they are continuing. So they've been done with Black residents, with youth, with victims of sexual violence, with victims of domestic violence, with the LGBTQI community, etc. That's a kind of high-level engagement usually between the chief and the command staff and folks who are recognized as leadership. In parallel, there have been facilitated processes between larger numbers of rank and file officers and larger numbers of members of the community. Some of those have taken weeks. They've been very carefully structured. Charles and Susan have facilitated some of those, and they have been tremendously powerful. I'm not just describing this, I'm giving you a little weather report on some of this. It's been really, really powerful. No matter how extensive those are, unfortunately, relatively small numbers of those, of people are capable of being directly, face-to-face engaged in those. And part of the power of these encounters is that people tell their stories, and the stories carry tremendous impact. So if I may, Chief, in one of the first sessions in Birmingham, in the LGBTQI panel, a trans woman said to the chief, in my memory here in Birmingham, there have been 4 murders of LGBTQI women. Not a single one of those homicides has been cleared. We know what that means. And I was sitting next to the chief in his top kick, and I saw them look at each other and sort of mouth, "Is that true? Because you didn't know that was true." And in fact, the meaning the community was taking from that was certainly not that this was known and was a product of neglect or worse, because you didn't know, right? That had not come to you. And I know that when the next one of those events happened, it was cleared in 2 weeks, right? But that story is very important. And lots and lots and lots of those sorts of stories always happen in this kind of engagement. And so we said, we need to capture those stories, we need to move them out into a more general public. And there are lots of ways to do that. There's social media, there's oral history, there's art. Is Louis here? Louis? So we're working with somebody who is actually building a phone-based app that will allow people to memorialize, collate, and then with some help disseminate these stories. So lots of technique that could go to this, but we want those collected, we want them moved out into the community discourse. And missing from this, for some reason, is what we think of as a consensus historical account of what happened in this place. So we ought to be able, as this process develops, and certainly as it moves to anything like a conclusion, for there to be an understanding around, let me just call it the experience of being policed in a Birmingham, Alabama, or any other place, in which the city can say, here is what happened here. And in a place like Alabama, it could begin with transportation. It could go all the way through slavery. It could go through the civil rights movement. It could go through all of what's germane there up to the present day. Obviously, the thought here is that that should be produced by something that is collective, representative, seen as legitimate, seen as authentic. And whenever it is completed, however it is completed, it is now a record that says this happened, it's real, we're not going to pretend any longer that it didn't happen, it matters, and we're not arguing about this anymore. And so, again, lots of ways of thinking about this. There are folks from Stockton here. When we first had this conversation in Stockton, I'm an academic, I'm a nerd, I think research, graphs, tables, appendices, data. And in the room in Stockton, somebody said, I hope you're not talking about a document. You know, if you want something to be ignored, write it down. We want a museum. Let's think about something like that. So all sorts of ways that could be done, but there should be some sort of an understanding that what happened is real, we're not arguing about it anymore, and it matters. The point of all this, in our minds, is not to get along better. Certainly can't fix everything, certainly can't make everybody fully understand each other, much less like each other. No expectation that there's going to be any kind of an absolute complete consensus. As I was making my way through this with all of your help, I had shoulder surgery a while back. I didn't like my surgeon at all. But the night before I was going to go under the knife, I trusted him, right? And we don't have to like each other. If we don't have enough trust and relationship to do the work we need to do to get out of the mess we're in real trouble. So in our minds, the threshold goal here is to reach a point of enough understanding and respect so that we can work together in a way that right now we can't. And if we get there, then the point is to now do new work. So this is a diagram that was put together for the National Initiative Cities. The National Initiative Cities began with work on procedural justice and implicit bias, so that was kind of part of the mix already. People are doing good work all over the country now in undoing harms, and there's actually a panel on this as part of this conference. You can find places that are eliminating money bail. They're telling their school resource officers, do not arrest students, we're not doing that. Here in this city, right here in the borough of Manhattan, they're no longer making arrests for a whole range of low-level misdemeanor offenses. People are expunging warrants. Lots and lots and lots of positive reform measures could be begun with. And then in any place, in any city, when people of imagination and goodwill sit down in a better relationship than they've got right now and say, we want to change what's going on here, how are we going to do that? And that's work that's never going to stop, right? We should all be trying to make this better all the time. The hope here is that the trust building and relationship building and establishment of a kind of fundamental collective agreement about what has been true and what we're moving away from can produce continued sustained improvement in criminal justice, public safety policy, of a kind and of a shape to be determined by the people doing that work, but in a fundamentally improved and more honest and more transparent environment. Did I take 10 minutes?
Not bad for you. I mean.
Well played.
Thank you very much, Chief Roper.
So let me start by saying good morning, everyone. And thank you so much for being here, and let me acknowledge the team from Birmingham. So if you're from Birmingham, would you please raise your hand, or otherwise make yourself known? And so this is an amazing group of people that's working with us to get the work done. And kudos to David and the NI staff for their work and their partnership, and the other pilot sites that are working with us. We're all taking this journey together. So David gave a great introduction, and so the title of this conference being Race, History, and Policing, Birmingham embodies all of that like no other city. And so in 1963, Dr. King said Birmingham was the most segregated city in America. And so we carry that baggage with us, and we call it policing under the shadow, because we're still policing under the shadow of the civil rights struggle. Now, every city has its own story. Your story may be a little different, but for our story, that's the reality of it. And so, from my standpoint, this reconciliation and challenge for us is taking some work. And we have a long way to go. But two things that I realized, and I had to write this down: it must be rooted in this commitment to acknowledge harm, and it also must be committed from the department and those working with the department. There must be a strong commitment to do better. So we have to acknowledge the harm that we've done, but we also must be committed to do better and be better, and that takes a lot of work. So we began this reconciliation work back in August 2016. Started with these facilitated meetings that David referenced earlier. And the groups we started to work with was, first of all, and I remember Dave and I was talking about it. I said the first group I must meet with has to be our foot soldiers. Those leaders who are still living, who fought for our civil rights, who marched the streets, where our police department was the arms and legs of this most racist government, most segregated government in America. And so our civil rights leaders, members of our LGBTQ community, youth groups, victim advocates from the domestic violence field, and from our sexual assault community. And so the civil rights leaders were the first, because I felt that it would be important to set the stage by acknowledging the harm that our department inflicted on people who were fighting for their constitutional rights. And so I told them that they were courageous when we were cowards, and they were noble when we had no honor. Not me personally, but the organization that I lead, the patch that I wear, the badge that I wear, representing 1,100 employees. The bottom line is we were wrong. That's why in the video you heard Reverend Bishop Wood say, "Amen," because we chased them all over Birmingham. And we were wrong. And they've waited all these years to hear that. And so, but the bottom line is acknowledging harm is not enough. There must also be a commitment to do better and to be better. And we call it the relentless pursuit of excellence, because every day we get up and we chop wood trying to be a better police department. So history has a way of coloring the present. So if an apology is necessary, I personalize it, as David mentioned. With our LGBTQ youth, I didn't go in so deep about the history of the civil rights struggle in the Birmingham Police Department and the city. But we talked about it from a youth lens that they needed to hear, and I'll refer back to them in a minute. So we have to say we understand and we acknowledge your anger and your grievances. Sometimes chiefs will say, "But I haven't heard any complaints from that community." And my response is maybe that they don't trust you to respond. So we can't take the fact that we haven't received any complaints as a green light that things must be well. Maybe they believe we won't do anything about it. And so when my citizen who's transgender said, "Chief, I don't think you all work as hard when a victim from our community is a homicide victim. When we're victimized, we don't think you work as hard. Well, we know on the inside of the department we're working as hard because that means a murderer is on the streets of our city. But their perception and from their space, and because we had no relationships, their view was reality that we didn't work as hard. And so 3 weeks later, when I'm standing in a motel room and there's a transgendered homicide victim laying on the hotel floor, I called up the captain and we talked, because we'd already talked about all of this, and we knew we need to solve this case. And we did. This person was targeting members of that community. And so we learned from them, and from that meeting with the LGBTQ community, we appointed a liaison, we developed a policy, we trained the entire police department, and we still have work to do there, but they saw concrete steps that their voices did not go unheard. But we are committed to do better. And so these listening sessions, whatever you want to refer to them as, small group sessions, they're a little different from the normal neighborhood meeting, where you go in there with your stats and you're ready to tell your side of the story on why burglaries are up and those kinds of things. No, we're listening because we can learn. We just had a session with LGBTQ youth, which I always come out of these meetings a much smarter chief. And they didn't want us to wear our uniforms. They wanted us to wear civilian clothes. And some of my staff was like, can't wear our uniforms? What kind of message is that sending? Well, we're going to be in their space, so let's not wear them. So I walked in with blue jeans and Nikes on. And we all laughed about that. And my staff, we all dressed down and had a wonderful, wonderful session. And one of the things, the leader sent some, she did an after-action report, and this is what she sent in some of the quotes. I highlighted one. That the kids had things to say, and it was cute and amazing. I think they felt so empowered that they got to go home and be like, we taught some cops what cisgender meant. I was just so surprised by who spoke and that they felt comfortable to do so, and that they were so transparent as well. Now here's the key. Some of them started the questions with a little bit of anger, but they calmed down and they were just very transparent and willing to talk to our police chief and our police command staff. That's the power of a moment. There's so much more work to do there, but we know we will get there because we're giving them voice and we are listening. So we are now in the process of building this out throughout the police department, because in the past it's been the chief and the command staff, and now we're handing that over to captains and precinct commanders, and we'll talk about a little more of that this afternoon when we talk about sustainability in one of the panels, because it's important that we build a framework that lasts. I know I'm on borrowed time. I've been chief over 9 years. But we want it to last because it's bigger than any single personality. And we look forward to your questions.
Ms. Sherry?
Good morning. Let me thank the National Network for Safe Communities for the invitation. I am Sherry Lewis. I serve as a neighborhood president. A large neighborhood president in the city of Birmingham that's over 100 years old. And we are afraid. We are afraid of the police. We don't have a whole lot of confidence right now in our officers. That's why I was asked to start a group, being a part of a group from the city called Birmingham Equally United, where our mission is to unify law enforcement and the community through understanding so we can stand together for a better future. What happens in our neighborhoods with the police is there's no communication. There was none going on that my neighbors were telling me. I'm the president of my neighborhood, so when my chief said they sometimes don't communicate and they don't call, well, they call the president when there's a problem. If it's 1 o'clock in the morning, there's a shooting, there's a break-in, I don't want to call the police. What will they do? I'm afraid. That's what I hear. So being a part of Birmingham Equally United, I paused first. I didn't want to be a part of the group because I have past negative experiences. When we came together, I had to sit in between two uniformed police officers. You could feel the tension in the room from the community and the police officers. We were looking at each other like, first, why are you here? What are you going to do? I'm not a quiet person, but I was quiet because the officers were in there. But we got a chance to move around, and I sat next to a gentleman who did not have on a uniform. I did not know he was a police officer. I was able to have great dialogue with him about what he thought about the police, not knowing that he was an officer. So I had to check myself and wonder, what is it? Well, I went back to a time some years ago when I was small of the impact that the police had on me. We were playing in the streets back in those days, and there was a young man, and he ran, and there was a police officer who caught him running, breathing heavy, slammed him to the ground, and said, "Nigga, you made me run." That affected me. That had an impact. That had a negative impact on my life. We stood there, about 6 of us. We never spoke of it. But every time I would see a police officer, I never saw a face. I only saw that uniform and that badge. And it had a negative impact on me. But as I continued to grow, there were other situations that I had. I'm from a black city. I live in a black neighborhood. I've watched as police officer, in my opinion, many times would treat black males differently than they would others. I would drive through other neighborhoods. What is it that we want as neighbors? We're looking for small victories. That's what we're looking for. The police would come to our neighborhood meetings. We have monthly meetings, and they would just roll off these numbers. You had 5 burglaries, you had this, and they'd be out the door. And we would be left with that information. The next month, the same thing. So being a part of Birmingham Equally United, when we were having the discussions, I talked to the police officer and said, "Can you come back sometime and tell us that we solved one of those crimes? Something good happened." We were impacted a few months ago when one of my neighbors was murdered, driving up in his driveway, getting his wife out of the car. He was shot several times. At that point, my neighbors were terrified. Those on that block were just unbelievably afraid. So I asked also in the group, can you drive your car back through there a couple of times so that they can see you and know that you're there, that you care? We meet with Birmingham Equally United every Wednesday. That's how serious we are about improving our relationships. But we've been meeting in the police precinct every Wednesday. I brought back to who I now call my colleagues that we need to do some walking and talking. We need to get out of that building, start walking the neighborhoods, start addressing people casually. We don't want it to be something where we got all the TV cameras, all that, because neighbors are not accustomed to seeing the police unless there's a problem in my neighborhood. I'll give you another example. We were at the fire department, and 2 of the police officers pulled up, and I waved. I went to the car, leaned my head in, and said hello. Within 15 minutes, I had 3 of my neighbors calling me, asking me what was wrong, why are they there, what's going on, what happened. I saw you talking to the police. So we've agreed. I've told you all of that because our beginnings and our meetings are tough meetings. The gloves are off. We talk to each other. They tell us what they think. The police officers do. But at first, I didn't think they heard us. I didn't think they were listening to us. We talked about the fact that an apology was needed. We accept the apology, but we've got to do more than accept the apology. We are coming together in Bellevue Heights neighborhood with the police officer. What's going on now is because of my education of what they do and how they do, and vice versa. We are understanding each other. We are not there yet, but we are on our way to understanding each other. There have been tears in the meetings. We've left in anger with each other. But we're doing some positive things. We're in the schools. Woodlawn High School is a high school in the city of Birmingham. We're meeting those students. And we did a survey. And the surveys came back very negative against the police officers. That wasn't anything as a community person I was happy about because I really wanted the young people to have a better view of the police officers. So we've decided now that when school starts again in the fall, we can't wait till they get in high school. We're going to elementary schools. We're going to face the problems. I can recall another incident where the police had to come, and I saw a mother take her child and pull her child behind her when the police drove up out of fear. And I asked her, I said, why did you pull your child behind? I didn't know what the police would do. And so we have to face that there is a problem. But we can't get stuck on the problem. We have to work with our elected officials. My counselor is here who lives in my neighborhood as well. We have a former mayor that lives in the neighborhood. But we still have a lot of crime going on in our neighborhood. And we are educating ourselves because we are going to not just the police precinct, but the dispatch center. How do calls come in? Why do neighbors always say, it took you forever to get here? We're understanding the police, but we want the police to understand that when they leave, we're still left with the pieces. When there's a break-in, we're the ones who have to board up the window or board up the door. It's still with us every single day. They move on to the next call, but we're stuck. In many cases, we also feel imprisoned many times. Why? We got better lighting. We've got 8-10 cameras around our house. Our doors have triple bolts on them. We feel imprisoned where we live, where we work, where we play. And we don't want to feel that way. And when we see the police, most neighbors, because we're taking surveys of what we think as well, are saying they may come, but they're not going to help us. And we also talked about what the police leave us with saying. On a burglary or a break-in, they normally say, well, there's not much we can do about it. We need hope that the police officer is going to do everything within their power to solve the crime. So we're looking at all of those avenues. We're walking our neighborhoods. We're not feeling empowered, but we're on our way. And we now, before we always saw the firemen as a part of our neighborhood when we have our fun days. We never invited the police. This year will be the first time we invite them because we're understanding as well that they are a part of the community. We always saw them as outsiders coming in our communities, our neighborhoods. Birmingham has 99 neighborhoods, and each neighborhood has its own issues. When we hear things like, well, we're just short officers, we hear those kinds of things as if, what do you want me to do about it? We want you to help us. We want the police to help us. We want the police to be there. We want the police to understand what we're going through. One of the police officers said he had a call a of where a woman called the police over some leaves off her neighbor's yard blowing into his yard. And that was serious to her. But the police officers sometimes think, well, I have other calls. When they come to our calls, that's the call we're concerned with. We're concerned with that call, whatever that is. And so there's a high expectation. We have also a white beat officer in a black neighborhood, where some of my neighbors at first didn't want to call because he was a white officer. But when we talked to the officer in our neighborhood meeting, we asked him, just hang around a little bit longer if you can, and have just a casual conversation with our neighbors. We have about 50 or 60 neighbors that come together every month. We have other neighbors that we knock on doors and we talk to. I get the calls to say, Sherry, can you call the police? I want it to get to the point that the neighbors are comfortable with calling the police and understand that the police are there to help them. We've still got issues in Bellevue Heights, in Birmingham, but I'm encouraged. And when I go back to my neighborhood meetings now, I tell them what I've learned. I've asked the officers to go back and tell their superiors what happened. I think we need to communicate more on what's happening. When my next door neighbor's house was broken into, we expect some follow-up. We want to hear some follow-up. So since my neighbor didn't hear anything, they're asking me, Sherry, well, what happened? Did they get anybody? Those small things matter to encourage us to become a part of what's going on, instead of running in the house before it gets dark and locking the doors and bolting in and not letting your children play in the streets or ride their bikes or get to know other neighbors. We're having some situations, but in Birmingham, starting with Birmingham Equally United and our police officer, and I say our now, before when there was a time I couldn't say our. It's making a difference. We've started, we're on the journey, and hopefully next year I'll tell you where we are further. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Ms. Estrada from Stockton, California.
Good morning, everybody. It's a great honor to be here and to be able to share about some of the great things we've been doing in Stockton. Stockton, a while back, was deemed one of the worst cities in the country. Our crime rate in 2012 went to a record high. And around that time is when we got a new chief. Chief Eric Jones came in and immediately started to reach out to the community. And I'm going to back up a little bit further to when I was younger. When you talk about fear, fear of the police was instilled in me before I even had any interaction with police, from my parents, from older relatives. You were afraid of police. And at some point, that fear turns into anger when you experience negative interactions with police. And when you grow up in the poor, high-crime neighborhoods like I did, you're going to have those negative interactions with police. Maybe not personally, but you watch family members, or your house gets raided because they think you have drugs in there, and your grandma gets slammed down to the ground and you're watching her cry. So it turns into anger and hate. And with that type of feeling towards police, you're not going to be cooperative when things happen. You're not going to want to talk to them. And fast forward a little bit to 2011, my mother was sitting in her living room couch, strapping my 4-month-old niece into the car seat. They were getting ready to go to the store, and there was a car drove by and sprayed, I think, over 30 high-powered bullets into the house, and my mother was killed. And who do you call? You call the police, right? And at that time, like I was, you're traumatized, but you want to cooperate and talk to the police. At least I did. And I felt like they didn't care. Chief Roper explained how sometimes the other side, they think we don't care, but you do. But at that time, I didn't see that. And so the anger just grew, and I said, like, I'm not going to talk to them because they don't care, right? There's all these murders, and they just want to know about other things. And so one of the things that I also noticed was that, like, nobody was talking, and a lot of people knew what happened. So that kind of stuck with me, and I have been working in the community for years during this time and trying to help a lot of parents work with their children on raising them not to be afraid of police, being more involved in the community, being more involved in your child's education, trying to be proactive in my community, and here I'm dealing with this situation. And then the opportunity came for me to join what Chief Jones started was his community advisory board. So when he came in, he immediately reached out to members of the community. We are a very diverse city, and this board is made up of a very diverse community, representing everyone in our community, different aspects of our community. And so I joined the board and quickly realized that we have a police department that really cares. So it took a lot of work. It took a lot of meetings, arguments. We have a very strong board. I don't know if I think Mr. Kennedy talked a little bit about Stockton and some things that were said when he went. But we had this board. It started in 2012, so shortly after the incidents that I just talked about. And Chief Jones started the procedural justice training with his department as well during that time, and then that's when the national initiative came in, and we were given the opportunity to take part in this program of building trust within the community, which was really important to me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. The sessions, the small group consultations, we call them the listening sessions. And we've held about maybe 30 or more listening sessions where the chief and maybe the deputy chiefs or the captains or lieutenants sit in, and they sit with a small group of different members of the community. So, we had one with the Latino community. There was a big fear about immigration and the new administration coming in, and we already have a lot of issues with that community not reporting crime out of fear of backlash with the deportation. But we had a meeting with them, and it was really good to see the community opening up about what they're afraid of specifically. And after that, there was follow-up. So the police department came to our agency, El Concilio. We're a non-profit-based community organization that works with our community. We've been working with the community for 50 years. El Concilio has been around for 50 years. And they've held forums where they're answering questions. So the follow-up is really important. I know we talked about that. So there's a lot of follow-up after these listening sessions. We go in, we listen. The community has a chance to express their concerns, to vent, to yell, to say, you did this to me, or I'm hurt because of this. And the chief listens. And one of the great things that I'm seeing out of that is he's taking all of that information and he's actually changing policy based on what the community is telling him out of those sessions. So the follow-up is really important when we're talking about these listening sessions and the national initiatives reconciliation. And he also does the part of, Mr. Kennedy talked about, acknowledging past harms, which is when you see for the first time the looks on people's faces when he does that, it kind of opens up some doors that were never opened before. And we just had a really good listening session with the African American Chamber of Commerce, where this elderly gentleman who at the beginning of the session was crossed arms and said, I've been to hundreds of these meetings, and here I am at this age in another one. And at the end of the meeting, he looked at Chief Jones and he said, you are the real deal, and I trust you. You tell me what I can do to help you get this, whatever you're doing, off the road, and we're gonna help you with this. And that was major. So we're looking forward to a lot of change in our city, and we're not gonna stop here. We're just getting started, and it's been great, and we're looking forward to sharing some of the outcomes of those listening sessions with the reconciliation.
Okay, let's open it up for questions from the audience first. I'll say a few things toward the end, but anyone have any questions now? Let's rock and roll. Lady in the back and then gentleman in the place.
Thank you. I have a question. Chief, I appreciated you're chief, right? I came in late. You talking about having the conversation with the youth from the LGBTQ community and them asking for you all not to come in uniform, which is a conversation that we have had, tried to have with our previous chief in North Carolina. He refused to do that, and we have a new chief now, so we'll see how that goes. But my question is, and then I'll explain why I'm asking it, is do you ever, or even when you're talking about the police officers coming into the community, do you ever do that out of uniform? And I ask that because there's for me or for the community members that I talk about, we may be talking about building relationships, but there's a complete imbalance of power for community members when what you know is that the person who is coming to have this conversation or to build relationships has more power than you visibly on your hip. And oftentimes police officers that I have spoken to, some want to do that and others say never, they would never do that.
So it depends for us. For us, it depends on the type of meeting, the purpose, and what's more appropriate. And so there are meetings where we're in uniform. There's meetings where I'm in a suit. There's meetings like Saturday, when I fly back home tonight, in the morning I'll be leading a prayer walk in one of our communities. I'll be in blue jeans and sneakers. And so it just depends. For me, the citizens know I'm the chief of police. So I don't have to wear the uniform as a reminder because we're in the community a lot with community walks and those kinds of things. So it just depends for us what type of meeting it is. So we've done both. With the youth, sometimes the uniform can be a barrier. So the person who leads our police athletic league, Captain Kathy right there, raise your hand, Kathy, so there's no. So when they're doing midnight basketball and those kinds of things, they won't let me get on the court. I'm wearing sneakers because they think I get hurt. But in that case, I don't need the uniform on because I'm ready to ball with the kids, and so I'm still trying to get on the court with them. So it just depends on what the event and the occasion is, and we try to do the things that's most appropriate and the thing that's going to help us the most.
Sherry, you want to take a swing at that? think he covered it all.
I think he covered it.
Gentleman in tan blazer there.
Chief Roper, this is to you. Are you from Alabama? And if you're from there, do you run into people that know you? And if you're not from there, how did they receive you?
So I am from Alabama. I was actually born and raised in Birmingham, but I didn't start my policing career in Birmingham. I started in Montgomery and then went to Hoover, the largest suburb outside of Birmingham, and then became chief in November 2007. And so because of that, there's a lot of people who know me from my childhood and those kinds of things. But even when I was working in the suburb, I was still doing a lot of things in the city. I'm an ordained minister also, and my church is in Birmingham. So through the years, I've always maintained that contact and that relationship. I think I get to see it through several different eyes, because when I was hired as chief, I was an outsider to the department, but I was an insider to the city. And so I was able to come in and implement some changes that I'm not proud of it, but we were talking about it last night. But I came in and replaced the whole command staff. Tough decision. But I knew we couldn't get to where we needed to go with the leadership at the time. And so and that takes some boldness, and it takes some standing by yourself. Now I have this amazing team that when you hear them, it's like you hear me. We say the same thing, but I knew we could never get there. It's the law of the lid. The organization can't rise any higher than the leadership level.
And let me say, I know A.C. Roper from elementary and high school.
Yes.
So and so working with him now, I put aside one part of him that I know, because when we were at the table talking about what's going on, it's on a professional level. But we've known each other since I was in the third, I think, and he was in the second. Throughout all of this time.
She didn't talk to me then. She was an upperclassman.
Absolutely. And through high school. And I know what type of gentleman he is, and I know the firmness he has in his job as well. And he understands me as a neighborhood leader as well. And so we can come together on issues, and afterwards, then we talk about old times.
That's right.
Gentleman there, and then gentleman in blue.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for your wisdom. My name is Jamal Alexander from York, PA, originally from Philadelphia, and I went through the juvenile justice system in 2002 and had gotten to a point where, my story, I was kind of sharing. For me, it was therapeutic. People on the outside had different approaches as far as, raising money, different things like that. And even some of my colleagues, my brothers and sisters that was going through it with me, like, Jamel, they using you. So there was a battle that I had growing up, but trying to switch over to this professional career. Long story short, 2013, I was the youngest on staff. I didn't have a degree at the time, so I was the first to go, right? Long story short, got myself together. Thank God I finished school, and I was blessed now to work with this philanthropy group with 23 communities as far as helping young people take their voice into action. So my question to the panel would be is, what are those practices or some of those things that kind of came up with your conversation when it came to talking to those young people, and how do you give them the power? That's one. But then on the flip side, as a father, what are some of these cultural competencies that we can kind of approach our police, our law enforcement with, if you all don't mind? Thank you.
Let's take the first swing on that.
So I'll jump on the first half of the question and let the panel address the other. Talking to the youth in their space, I think, was absolutely the way to go. Having meetings at City Hall and at the police headquarters, I mean, that's old school now. Going to them is key, and hearing their voices where they know you're listening. For example, there's a lot of talk about especially from adult community leaders, about having African-American officers in African-American communities at times. Well, to sit there with the youth and have a young lady, African-American student, say, "Chief, we need some white SROs." She said, we know all the African American ones, but we need to build relationships with some white officers. And I'm thinking, no one's ever told me that. And it was absolutely from their space and from their perspective. She was saying, representing students from her high school, you keep giving us African-American SROs, but we want to cross the bridge too. We want to go across the divide and have relationships with Caucasian officers. And so Kathy and I had a conversation about that, and that's what we're working on right now. And so listening to them in their space, I think, empowers them. As the other question was about when there's obvious an imbalance in power, what that does to a conversation. And for us, seeking first to understand is so critically important versus going into a meeting and making sure everybody understands where we're coming from, but seeking first to understand their viewpoint, I think is critically important. And the way to do that is in their space where they have the most voice.
You've probably seen this, but I think it's worth putting a name to it. In the work I've seen done with young people do not have any trouble speaking up. I mean, it's one of the great things about working with young people is they're way more direct than we are. What happens over and over again, and the reason that it's good to have some people like Susan and Charles, or to get some coaching on how to facilitate these sort of processes that we're talking about. What happens over and over again is that people say to the young people, we want to hear what you think, and then whatever adults have come with them take over. And there's this term that all the men should be real conscious of about mansplaining, right? Because we do that. Adult-splaining is a real phenomenon. And part of what's really helpful in those processes is for whoever is kind of managing the room to keep the adults in their place and let the young people have the space they need to talk, because whoever, their teacher, their program manager, their coach, whoever, they will just take up all the air in the room.
And we had that happen in Birmingham. David and I were sitting there with youth advocates who brought youth to the meeting. And at one point we looked at each other, David and I, it was like, it would be rude to tell them to please just shut up. Let's hear the kids. And but they sucked up 90% of the time that we had allocated for the meeting. And so we've learned from that now. So now when we meet with the youth, we want to meet with the youth and not have the adults speak for them, because they can't talk for themselves, as David mentioned.
And to talk a little bit about from a parent's aspect, we have to teach our parents to not teach their kids or tell their kids or threaten their kids with police officers when they want them to behave. Because that's the first thing we see, that's the first thing we do. You better behave, look at that cop, he's going to get you, he's going to arrest you. And then the fear, that's the fear that starts. And then that fear grows into something else. We have a little thing that we do in Stockton called Cocoa with the Police. And the police officers come out like to the local libraries or bookstores, and they have hot chocolate, hot cocoa, and some pastries. And parents are encouraged to bring their small children to have cocoa with the police. And sometimes the police officers will read them a story from the storybook, and it's a very pleasant interaction. And at first, you can see the small children hesitant to go because they're kind of afraid, right? But then after a while, once they start to have that interaction, because it has to be taught. It's funny how when there's something negative, it just has to be the words. You just have to say it, and then, the fear is there. But for it to be positive, there's a little bit more work. There has to be that interaction. It has to be taught. And our children are worth that extra work because it can save their lives later on. Not literally sometimes, but even further to where they can be more successful because their self-esteem is a lot higher. When you're held down in fear, you're down here, you don't go very far because you don't feel too good about yourself because you're afraid. And we teach a lot about self-esteem and building up your child. Has a lot to do with how they act and their personalities and characters. The meeting places are out in the community. They go to the libraries, bookstores, coffee shops, community centers. They're out with the community members. And they're community-led. So the department takes feedback from the community as to where would you like these to be held next, and they schedule them accordingly.
I think we meet, Birmingham Equally United, we meet at the school, high school juniors and high school seniors. At first we had the challenge of those students did not want to come with the police. When they heard it was the police, they didn't want their friends to know, and others thought you're in trouble. But what we do is when we get them in the room, and some we pulled in from the hallway, hanging out, trying to see what was going on, we decided to let them lead. We give them some instructions on what they need to do, and they lead us. They talk to us about the issues with the police, and it's working for us. And then we can slide in a few educational games where we can get questions answered by them. But they're the leaders of our group when we come with them.
Okay, let's try to get some questions from this side.
Just one question for Chief Roper. I heard you say a couple of times how you have made attempts to restore the harm. And my question is, do you all practice restorative justice or community justice there? And the other question, well, the other one is a comment regarding the experience that I'm having in Fort Myers, the fact that you're having a lot of success because you had to remove all of the command officers. I'm sure David Kennedy and I would talk about that, but that's what I really want to know about your community justice or restorative justice practices.
Our judge, our senior presiding municipal judge, is all in on restorative justice. We just had a meeting 2 weeks ago about another initiative he's rolling out. So we have community courts, we have specialized courts. Our mayor is a leader leading the effort in the state for ban the box and those kinds of things regarding employment opportunities. And so over the course of the last year, we've rolled out some initiatives, but the best is yet to come because the initiative that he's rolling out, the judge is rolling out probably in the fall, am I right? September. It's going to reduce our jail population tremendously. And it's going to take some work to align all the systems, but I tell you what, I'm excited about it because it's a win-win for everyone. And so for so long, the police department has been because we're the front door. Everyone looks at police to address all these issues for this. We call it the criminal justice system, but it's really the criminal injustice system. And so now getting other alignments in place is going to really help the city of Birmingham and our population. We're excited about that.
Charles, may I?
Yeah.
So very quick special pleading for the conference. There's a panel this afternoon about the use of existing criminal justice discretion to just stop doing harmful things. And our imagination on this kind of thing usually goes to really heavy lifting like new laws and new courts and things like that, all of which can be really important. But in fact, in that first listening session with the foot soldiers, the chief said, we're really concerned about serious violent crime. And we used to send officers into your neighborhood, and we stopped everything that moved. Tickets, arrests, citations, inconvenience, prone people out on the sidewalk. We don't do that anymore. I have stopped that. we know it does harm, we're not doing it anymore. And there's lots of work being done nationally about kind of stroke of the pen initiatives to get rid of bail, void warrants, get rid of fees and fines, stop doing bad things right away. And again, we've got some time on that this afternoon.
I'll tell you something else. Oh, let me stop.
Look here now, don't make me pull this panel over.
Yes, sir. I'll stop. I'll stop right there.
Go ahead, and then I'm going to wrap things up.
Because Alabama is a very interesting state. I mean, we're normally number 1 in football, but number 49 in reading. And so there's some work to do there. But this pretrial diversion program that we're implementing in September. But on top of that, we're trying to implement an arrest citation program where we can divert people away from arrest for these low-level offenses. And we found out here in the last 2 weeks that there's a state law that stops us from doing that. So now we've got to initiate a whole conversation and dialogue and get enough political pull across the state because we don't have home rule. But those are the kind of obstacles that are built into the system right now that we've got to overcome. And we have the momentum and the passion to really go at it. And so we have a team that's willing to work with us.
I just want to say this. It's what's so scary is our current president is talking about taking us back to the 50s, the way that law enforcement was implemented in those times, civil rights, Jim Crow, what have you. And it's so refreshing to have these conversations about how we are currently making changes and currently moving forward to maintain a restorative approach to law enforcement and the way that the justice system is currently operating. I just want to make that statement.
Okay. I want to thank everybody, especially our panelists. They've been really great. You give them a round of applause, please. And I want to close out. I get a chance to make the last comment, and that is this. Reconciliation as a concept is a very freighted term. It's not a program. It's not a singular object. It's a direction. And like any direction, it has to be a strategy with multiple points of entry. Restorative justice being a huge part of it. Listening being a major part of it. But above all, the value of human dignity, the value of the human spirit, and the value of everybody's individual civil rights must be of primary concern. We all have rights in this nation. Sometimes some people tend to forget that. What we need to do as individuals is to remind our elected officials that they work for us. And as policymakers, to remember, this is a temporary job, not a career. We're just here to help people live a better life, have a better quality of life, because in the end, we all get rained on at the same time. We all have our children that we want to grow up and be better than us, even when they aggravate us and give us gray hair. We want them to have as good as, if not better than, quality of life than we enjoy. Thank you very much.